Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my July 2017 wrap-up and my August TBR. Booktubeathon and an audiobook binge at the beginning of the month both contributed to me having a fairly successful reading month in July. When I say audiobook binge, I mean that I completed 3 audiobooks in pretty rapid succession in just about a week's time. The first audiobook that I completed during the month of July was Voices in the Ocean, A Journey into the Wild and Haunting World of Dolphins by Susan Casey. This was a nonfiction pick that I thought would be great for the summertime, considering I love nautical books, books dealing with marine life or just the ocean in general during the summer. Around this time last year, I read and loved The Soul of an Octopus. And I would be lying if I said I didn't go into this book hoping that this book would give me similar feelings to that one. While unsurprisingly, that didn't end up happening, I still really enjoyed this book. However, I found it to be a much heavier read than I was anticipating. Of all the animals in the world, dolphins have probably one of the best images among humankind. They're the funny, smart, and playful little rascals of the sea. Their smiling faces and acrobatic flips make them much beloved in marine parks all over the globe. They are amazing creatures. In many ways, they're more evolved than humans, but their social interactions very closely mimic those of humans. They even seem to recognize their own similarities to humankind. They're always extremely curious of humans that they interact with, and there have been many documented cases of dolphins wanting to help humans that they meet. Their use of sonar to hunt and to communicate with each other is so remarkable and seems like something more out of a science fiction novel than something that exists in real life. But despite humankind's deep love for dolphins, this book very heavily focuses on the myriad of threats that dolphins face. From severe pollution in our oceans where these creatures live, to the bombardment of the seas with military sonar that interferes with these animals' communications and hunting ability, to the straight up horrors of the dolphin trade. These animals are consistently subject to atrocities dealt by humankind. As hard as it was for me to hear all of the things that this book details, I do think it was very important for me to have a knowledge of these things. And certainly after reading this book, I stand in even firmer opposition to animals being held in captivity. On the whole, this book was a heartbreaking discussion on the capacity for human arrogance. But on the other hand, it was simultaneously a very touching plea for interspecies education, conservation, and kindness. The next audiobook I finished was one I enjoyed much less than the previous one, and that was Regen by Patricia Park. This is marketed as a Jane Eyre retelling, and it follows a young Korean woman living in Queens, fresh out of college in the early 2000s. At the beginning of the book, she is struggling to find work. When she first graduated college, she received an offer from a large financial firm to come and work for them. But after an economic downturn, that offer was rescinded and she needs to find a job. Scouring job listings, she is forced to take a job as a nanny for a moderately hipster couple in Brooklyn. Given that this is a Jane Eyre retelling, when she is working as a nanny for this couple, she and the husband start to develop a little some. A little later on in the book, our modern Jane is completely overwhelmed by her situation. Not only is the modern Mr. Rochester married, and not to someone confined to an attic, but 9/11 has just happened and there has been a sudden death in her extended family. Faced with all of this, Jane makes a very abrupt decision to hop on a flight to Korea, and off she goes to figure out her life. Now is probably a good moment for me to say that the portions of this book that take place in Korea are undeniably the best portions of this novel. I found the portrayal of modern life and culture in Korea absolutely fascinating, and I thought it was really interesting seeing how Jane's American identity both helped and hindered her during her time there. I enjoyed that section so much that I would happily have read an entire novel just about that. The rest of the book? Sloppy. I found Jane's character to be grating and entitled. It really personally pissed me off hearing her be very snooty towards working in childcare. Guess what? I work in finance now, which was her original industry, and I worked in childcare too, as a nanny while I was finding my footing. It paid decently and taught me lessons that I couldn't have learned anywhere else, so take several seats. The Jane Eyre comparisons are few and far between once you get past the basic structure of the book, and the fan servicey winks to names of places from the classic make this book even more of a try-hard than it already was. The modern Mr. Rochester is about as sexy as a hemorrhoid, and by this book's calculations of how two people fall in love by staying up late and eating weird food combinations, I should be in love with my Hulu subscription because I love MasterChef. If the Korea elements of this book or the immigrant experience elements of this book have you intrigued enough to give it a try, be my guest. But if you are going into this because it is a Jane Eyre retelling, please take my advice and run the opposite direction. The third and final book that I devoured in my audiobook binge was Sons and Daughters of Ease and Plenty by Ramona Acebal. This book starts off on Labor Day weekend of 1976. A young couple and their 3 children are enjoying their weekend at the beach. But the wife, Fern, gets a phone call from her lawyer alerting her that her recently deceased parents, from whom this family derived all of their current wealth, died with absolutely no money left. Faced with what he believes to be the abhorrent idea of giving up his writing ambitions to finally take over his father's company, Fern's husband, Edgar, clumsily falls into the arms of another woman, or at the very least, fails to dodge her very aggressive advances. When Fern finds out about this affair, there is understandably a rift in their marriage. And independently of one another, they each decide to disappear into the night in order to clear their heads. This is a big problem, not just for the future of their marriage, but for the fact that they both decided independently to disappear on the same night. Neither one the wiser that the other has bolted. This means that their children, a 9-year-old girl and twin 6-year-old boys, have been left at home to fend for themselves. We then start hopping back and forth in time between that situation to Fern and Edgar's early lives and to earlier periods in their relationship. I know it can probably sound extremely pretentious, and it can be at times, I won't lie about it, but I really did enjoy this book. I really liked the writing. I found it very melodic. It reminded me a lot of Fates and Furies. I really enjoyed the inner conflict of this couple, the way that they hate their wealth and privilege, but how they both seem to not be strong enough to completely break away from it. I also found it interesting that although this is a couple who has effectively abandoned their children, it was my experience that I didn't immediately hate them or assume that they didn't love their children. They were more like lost puppies than anything else. As the book progressed, I really saw the way that the loss of the money forced these characters to confront their own feelings and force them into a position where they now have to decide what their lives are going to look like now that the money is gone. And as they start to come to terms with that, they start to regain some of the youthful vigor that we see in them in earlier parts of the novel. This novel does not have as much staying power as I originally thought it would. It really struck me at the time, but I am finding it fading away a little bit from my memory. But I would certainly recommend it. I did find it very enjoyable, and it makes a very good seasonal read considering Labor Day weekend is not too far away. Right before the Booktubeathon and then during the Booktubeathon, I read 3 graphic novels, all written by Knisley, the first being Something New, Tales from a Makeshift Bride, French Milk, and Displacement, a travelogue. I have mixed feelings about these. On one hand, I really like Lucy Knisley. I really like her art. I like her perspective. I find her life very interesting. But on the other hand, I had some problems with particularly 2 of these graphic novels. Something New is about her wedding to her longtime on-again, off-again boyfriend, John, whom you may have had an opportunity to meet in her previous graphic novels. French Milk is a travelogue of her time spent in Paris with her mother during a winter break in her college years. And Displacement is another travelogue, but this one chronicles her time spent accompanying her very elderly grandparents on a cruise. My least favorite is definitely French Milk. Lucy does not come off that great in this one. She seems grumpy and rather ungrateful, and there is way too big of a focus on the food that they were eating. Her most recent release, Something New, came in second for me. It was very enjoyable seeing how she coped with wedding planning and how she and her family molded a very special, very unique wedding experience for her. I did not have a wedding, preferring to go the City Hall route, and this book did not make me regret that decision. The jaw-dropping price tags and the constant pressure of family drama and expectations were very well chronicled in this graphic novel. Lucy's money-saving, do-it-yourself methods were very clever, but she seemed to be reluctant to acknowledge that a lot of help from her family, both monetarily and otherwise, and her own artistic skill would be 100% necessary to achieve what she did. My favorite was definitely Displacement. I thought it very touchingly showed the struggles and the joys of providing care and companionship for those who cannot be independent. In addition to Lucy's artwork showing just how she and her grandparents spent their time on this cruise, there were also excerpts with accompanying illustrations, of course, from her grandfather's diary, where he talked about some of his experiences during World War II. I found it very raw and very honest. This has been my favorite graphic novel of hers so far, but of course I'll need to read her new ones as they come out. And I believe the only one I have left to read is An Age of License. Other books I read during Booktubeathon include Pittsburgh Drinks. This is a history of drinking, bars, the culture around drinking in Pittsburgh from just before Prohibition up until the modern day. I did really enjoy this, but I failed to find a lot in this book that would be specific to Pittsburgh, that would help separate it from just any other urban area during the time in the United States. However, there are some bomb drink recipes in here. I also read Knives and Ink, Chefs and the Stories Behind Their Tattoos. I enjoyed this one just as much as I enjoyed Pen and Ink, and was very surprised to see just how many chefs have tattoos of pigs. I also read a poetry collection called Octopus by Patrick Warner. I will admit that I bought this book entirely because of the cover during a recent trip to Cleveland, which I guess then fulfills the challenge to read a book you bought because of the cover. I typically consider myself as dumb as a box of rocks when it comes to poetry. I'm always convinced that I will neither understand it nor take anything out of it. I found myself not only comprehending this collection, but also really enjoying it. It's something I definitely want to revisit later. And the last book I read for the Booktubeathon was The Time Night by Ludmila Petrushevskaya. This was my random pick off of my TBR for the month of July. It was short enough, so I decided to just put it right on my Booktubeathon TBR. This is a stream of consciousness novel set in 1992 in Russia, following the most dysfunctional of all dysfunctional families. I found it funny at times, but extremely grim, and I had a very hard time staying invested in any of the characters or the story. And then at the very end of the month, I finished 2 more books, the first being The Episodic Career, How to Thrive at Work in the Age of Disruption by Farai Chideya. This was a pick off of my shrinking young professional TBR that talks about the new face of work in our modern age. In this book, she discusses the new realities that we face, such as disappearing industries due to newer and newer forms of technology, real biases that exist out in the world that will get in someone's way as they try to obtain and grow a career. And she talks about what type of person will find themselves successful in today's world. I really appreciated the honest, non-sensationalized tone to this book. She doesn't attempt to scare you with figures, and she doesn't promise you overnight success by adhering to principles which always just equate to believe in yourself. She paints a picture of the real challenges that exist out there in the workforce right now, and better yet, gives you tools to be able to step up to those challenges. She pays a very large amount of attention to telling stories of real people that she interviewed that I really do feel added something to this book. I did think at times that these stories were a bit too numerous, but I still found them valuable and sometimes downright inspiring. A part of this book that I was initially charmed by, but later grew disinterested in was her Myers-Briggs-esque workplace personality assessment. While I found my type to be accurate, there weren't any pieces of type-specific workplace advice, and so I found myself questioning the value of that very large section of this book. But I definitely would recommend this book to all of you out there in the workforce like myself. And the very last book I finished in July was A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery. This was a buddy read that I did with Stephanie of That's What She Read. This is a work of historical fiction that is set during the emergency period in India in the mid-1970s. It follows a very large cast of characters, but primarily 4 different characters. The first main character is a middle-aged widow who has her own apartment. Another character is her boarder, a young student living with her. And then lastly, there are 2 tailors who come to her apartment and work for her to make dresses for an export company. This was a heartbreaking book, but as Stephanie and I both seem to experience, we pulled back emotionally from the book at a certain point when it became so clear that these characters were just going to continue going through hell. I can't say I didn't enjoy this book, because I did, but as I expressed to Stephanie at one point, I felt I couldn't love this book because it didn't seem that there was much more to it besides being a witness to suffering. I did find it very valuable to be able to learn more about the emergency period in India, which was a piece of history that I knew absolutely nothing about. I found myself thinking a great deal about the human toll that is exacted when people want to clean up an area. I thought there was a very interesting parallel between modern gentrification and some of the events of this novel. Beyond that observation, I didn't feel that the author asked anything more of me besides for tears. I can see why this book would be beloved for some people, but as a more logical person, it would never be a book that would be able to win my heart. Moving on to what I am currently reading. I am currently listening to An Untamed State by Roxane Gay on audiobook. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm just finding it a very difficult book to listen to / read, but I'm hoping to make good progress with it this week. I'm also almost finished with What We Lose by Zinzi Clemens, which I'm hoping to do a full review for. And because right now the Read Your E-Reader-a-thon is going on, I am currently reading Owl and the Japanese Circus. I'm around halfway done with this and absolutely loving it so far. While the Read Your E-Reader-a-thon is still going on during the first 2 weeks of August, I will be picking up at least 1, if not 2, ebooks for my TBR, but I'm leaving that subject to whatever I'm in the mood for at the time. However, if you'd like to get an idea of what I might select for my TBR, I did a full video about books that are currently on my Nook. I will link that video down in the description box below if you'd like to get an idea of what I have to choose from. 2 books that I did not get a chance to get to in July that I would like to get to in August are Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates and Appointment in Samara by John O'Hara. Off of my Young Professional TBR, I'd like to read So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. And in an attempt to catch up on the classic books that I was hoping to read in 2017, this month I am planning on reading Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov and The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. When it comes to my random selection, my random pick for the month of June, In the Land of Invented Languages, I did not get a chance to get that far into before I fell out of the mood for it. But because I don't want to give up on my random selection for June, I went back to the 3 different selections I made off of my TBR to choose from. One of those was The Diviners by Libba Bray, which sounds really great about now. So instead of In the Land of Invented Languages, I'm replacing it with The Diviners, and we'll be reading that this month. Now the only thing left to do is pick my random book for the month of August. Option number 1 is a book that I've actually been enjoying practicing my audiobook narration skills on. That is Look at Me by Jennifer Egan. Option number 2 is Brand Thinking and Other Noble Pursuits by Debbie Millman. And funnily enough, option number 3 is one that I was sent very recently, unsolicited by the publisher, called Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Moraes. I was actually intending to do a review of this one in the not too distant future, so I think I'm going to just go with this one. So those were all the books that I read in July, what I'm currently reading, and what I'm planning to read for August. I would love to hear from you down in the comment section below if you've ever read any of these, if you've heard of them, if you liked any of them, or if you would like to talk to me somewhere other than YouTube. You can find me a variety of places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.